Today is Wednesday, January 25th, 2012. I'm Matthew T.G.
I'm Heath Mulliken.
And I'm Tony Casey. Welcome to the Techology Show, a weekly podcast featuring technology, theology, and everything in between. The world's only user-antagonistic podcast. This is episode 141.
Woohoo!
Good morning. So the Super Bowl set. We have our teams.
And anybody who says they had New England and the Giants in the Super Bowl preseason is a liar.
Okay.
No one had that. I think, Tony...
You can't say nobody. I mean, someone out there probably.
No, nobody. I'm just telling you.
All right.
Tony, to me, the Giants look a lot like the Packers last year. Packers had to win their last couple of games.
Right.
And just got hot at the right time and rolled through.
Not only did it look like the Packers of last year, but they looked like the Giants of about 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, the Giants did this. They had they did the same thing. Had to have a run at the end of the year. They swept through the playoffs. I think the Giants will win it.
How sick is this going to make Colts fans and Peyton Manning?
if Eli wins this second.
It's a no-win situation. Because if New England wins, you have your arch nemesis, your arch rival winning in your building. If the Giants win, Peyton Manning is no longer the best quarterback at his kitchen table.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in the family. Yeah. The kid brother is.
Speaking of New England, we bring back and welcome back Maine native Matthew Deprez.
Nice transition.
Matthew Deprez speaks regularly at colleges, conferences, and churches on issues surrounding youth culture and intergenerational ministry. He's currently on staff at Frontline Community Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan, as the Now Generation pastor, and he also sits on the emerging leader cabinet of the Wesleyan Church. Matthew's the author of 2 books, Discovering Jesus and Why We're Unashamedly Intergenerational. He lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with his wife Megan and their son Isaiah. Matthew, welcome back to the show.
Hello. I want to say that I'm very excited about the Patriots. I stood in my living room when Billy Cundiff missed that field goal. Man, I was pumped. And then I felt terrible for the guy. I felt terrible for him. So
Now, they're saying now, some of the Baltimore people are saying that the Patriots on their scoreboard had the down wrong that entire drive.
That.
And
they messed up his rhythm, right? So
sounds like
that's what kind of says. He said it was the scoreboard is why he shanked it there to the left. And so, I mean, this, organized crime. That's who controls the Patriots.
That's right.
Hey, Bill Belichick, it doesn't surprise me whatsoever.
He does kind of look like the Godfather, doesn't he?
The Godfather does not wear a cut-off sleeved hoodie. I'll tell you that.
Well,
it's awesome.
Hey, Matthew, last time you were on, we talked about intergenerational ministry in your church, and your church was getting ready for the Sticky Faith Cohort, which I believe took place in Pasadena, California. How did that go? Tell our audience a little bit about that. What was the overall goal of that gathering?
Yeah, it's a year's worth of consulting with the Fuller Youth Institute. And so if you guys are familiar with Dr. Kara Powell and Brad Griffin out at the Fuller Youth Institute, the college transition project that they did, talking about seniors in high school transitioning their faith into college. That's what we were out there talking about, specifically what they would refer to as sticky faith. And so it was an incredible year. Lots of webinars, phone consultations, that kind of stuff. What I found to be really valuable, especially now that consulting is done, is the networking with other churches. With our church being as intentionally intergenerational as we are, for us, oftentimes it feels very lonely. It doesn't feel like a lot of other churches are doing it. We kind of feel like we're, off by ourselves. And so to get together with 15 other incredible churches that are processing a new way of doing youth ministry, a new way of doing church, was awesome. I mean, it was like people with an infectious disease all coming together for the very first time, and so it was incredible. So the networking was really good. The gathering of ideas was awesome. Listening to Fuller's research and the implications of what they're saying was fascinating. And then what they do for every single church is they have basically they ask every single church to create a 2-year breakthrough plan. And so our breakthrough plan is actually 15 pages long over the next 2 years of where we think we're headed with our church and with intergenerational ministry and with student ministries. And so I would highly, highly recommend if there's anybody out there watching and you're interested in being a part of some great networking, great teaching, great consulting, go to stickyfaith.org, and they have a cohorts tab, and you can contact them there and be a part of it. It's well worth it. It's been great. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, I want to talk a little bit about the technology of the webinars. Could you give us a sense of how that was conducted?
Yeah, we weren't on the videos. Part of the churches weren't on the videos. They set up cameras at Fuller, and so this is at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena. Maybe I said that already. That was redundant, probably. But so it's at Fuller, and so they set up their videos there, and they'll either have like 1 or 2 cameras between Kara Powell and Brad Griffin, and then go between the two, go between those 2 cameras, and then they will bring a speaker in. So they had Mark DeVries in from like the Nashville, Tennessee area one time, who does family ministry stuff. I think he wrote a book, Family Based Ministry is what it's called. Just phenomenal book. I mean, it's old and timeless. And so they'll send his video feed in and go between the video, and then we're on conference calls. And so we just talk and we'll mute ourselves and then unmute ourselves when they do that. And so it works really well. It's a great system. And then they record all of the webinars. So if there are people from your church who can't be there, then they've got like a wiki spaces kind of thing where you can watch all of the videos in case you missed them. And they're like an hour to an hour and a half at a time.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a bit of a sideline, but here is a wonderful use of the technologies that are available to us. And in ministry, it is my belief that we're just not tapping these technologies. I mean, this is a great example of doing that, but oftentimes in ministry, we're just not tapping the technologies that are available to us through the internet, through cameras, things of this nature now, webcams. That's cool.
And it is amazing how connected you feel when you do something like that. We were out there twice in February and in October in person for what they refer to as the summits. And so, other than it might be the only way you'd feel connected is going out there if you didn't have the webinars, but you feel like you get to know everybody and really get connected with the people who are in the cohort. So, yeah.
Well, even at just a micro level, I mean, a lot of times with our pastor, Matthew T.G., who's the producer of our show, my preferred way of communicating with him is FaceTime. I'll just FaceTime him, and there's just something that seems to be, it's like you're there, you can see one another. And so, again, wonderful use of technology. Hey, in preparation for today's show, I read your blog, All Churches Are Multigenerational, Few Are Intergenerational. I thought you made a great distinction. Could you unpack that for us a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah, I wrote a blog, All Churches Are Multigenerational, Few Are Intergenerational, and the thing kind of took on a world of its own, got a lot of traffic. And what I was trying to talk about there was that all churches at some point will have all generations in the same room. And so a lot of churches right now with this whole intergenerational movement is they're wondering, what would happen if we canceled our Sunday morning programming and we just had all generations do intergenerational worship. Now, we do that, and we think it's a great thing. But for some churches, what they've done is they've gone to no student ministry programming, and students will sit in the same room, but they haven't done anything to intentionally connect generations at all. Right. And so we would say that's multi-generational, not intergenerational. And the distinction I made in the blog is that multi-generational ministry is like the repeat button on iTunes. It's the arrows that go in a circle. There's students on one side of the room, adults on the other side of the room, and they're not walking across the room. There's no intersecting of generations. Intergenerational ministry is like the shuffle button on iTunes, which is the way it's the 2 arrows that are going forward, and then they decide to intersect on some level. And what that is it's like adults and students on separate sides of the room, and at some point generations decided to walk across the room, get to know each other, and there was an intersecting of generations. The way I described it is intergenerational ministry is that senior citizen who walks across the room and says to that student, "Hi, my name is so-and-so. What's your name? How can I pray for you?" Multi-generational ministry is when we sit in the same room as each other, we think we're oftentimes being intergenerational, but we don't know anything more about the other generation than when we previously walked in the room. And so that's why I was saying all churches are multi-generational, whether it's a funeral or a service or a potluck or, small group leaders that are adults with students in their services. We will at some point have all generations in the same room. It's a matter of connecting the generations together so that they deeply, intrinsically, relationally know each other. And we joke, the intergenerational ministry thing is like the middle school dance. Eventually, the guy has to walk across the room and talk to the girl and ask her to dance. So that's the distinction that I made in the blog.
Just to follow up here, it just dawned on me, Matthew, that we may have some listeners who didn't hear our first interview with you this past summer, and maybe they're coming in on the tail end of this. For the person in ministry who doesn't quite understand, well, so what's the big deal here about intergenerational? Maybe talk a little bit about some of the research that we're beginning to see concerning the importance of this issue in the church.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason why we're doing this is because of the research from the Fuller Youth Institute, part of our Sticky Faith cohort. The Fuller Youth Institute researched or basically studied 500 high school seniors as they transitioned from high school into college and watched their faith transition. Basically they found about 40 to 50% of students that are in our youth groups, and these are youth group graduates. So these are seniors in high school who are directly connected in their youth groups. About 40 to 50% of them will basically ditch their faith after they graduate out of our programs and go away to college. What's even more interesting is talking to Brad Griffin lately. He sent me a statistic from a Lifeway study in 2007 that out of the 40 to 50% of the students who left faith, 80% of those kids intended to stick with faith. So that really leads to a question of, is it a preparation issue for us? If those 80% are intending to stick and only 20% are saying, see ya, is it a preparation issue? 6 out of the 7 students that Fuller researched did not feel equipped to transition their faith from high school to college. Wow. 6 out of 7. And so that's pretty shocking. And so in that regard, what they found was that students who had intergenerational relationships or had the capacity for intergenerational things at their church, intergenerational worship, they transitioned better with their faith after they left high school. And they would say they didn't find, like a silver bullet or one thing that you could practice in student ministries that would keep faith, but intergenerational ministry was definitely one of the higher sticking points. And so for us, we say, I was actually speaking at Central Wesleyan Church in Holland 2 weeks ago in their main services and was talking about, is this about intergenerational ministry? Maybe, maybe not. This is about faith retention at its highest possible potential, right? And so what we're interested in and what Fuller's interested in is figuring out how do we have a faith that sticks after we graduate? How do we prepare our students to have a faith that lasts a lifetime as opposed to just for 4 years while we're in school? Because student ministries for so long have been deemed successful based upon the numbers of kids who come to their program.
Yep. Right.
And then those kids are oftentimes, leaving faith. And so we would say, the success of student ministries is not really necessarily the numbers of kids who come to your program, even though that's important. We think success in the future is going to be based upon how many kids stick with faith after they graduate out of our programs. We think that's a better question to ask.
When I was in student ministry, that's how I gauged everything. But then once a kid graduates, you gauge it by how they're doing in life. Yeah. And, I don't sit around now thinking, oh, man, I remember the good old days. We had this many. I think about, well, I wonder how so-and-so's doing. Yeah. I wonder how this kid's doing. And when I find kids that have left the faith and are going down the wrong path, it's really disheartening. Now, you guys are doing something new with your students in regards to helping them plot from the present to the future. We talked about, we do a good job of looking at the past to the present. Yeah. What does that look like in your church? And this whole topic of what we're talking about, faith retention, how is this your new discipleship strategy helping with faith retention?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. This is something we learned through the Sticky Faith cohort this year, and we really processed. The churches are doing a great job of bringing you from your past to your present. So we talk about, being broken and wounded and getting healed and forgiveness and the things that affected us because we're products of our past. I mean, that's just what we are, and oftentimes we're products of our past. We don't have to be, but more often than not we are. But the church has not really, I don't know if done a good job is the right word, but at least definitely not focused on what it looks like to move from the present to the future. I know Mars Hill Bible Church here in Grand Rapids is doing a lot of present to future stuff, really trying to process that. But basically, a guy named Dr. Scott Cormode, who is at Fuller, did some presentations when we were at the Sticky Faith cohort and was on some of the webinars. The guy is an absolute genius. And what he talks about is how vision is shared stories of future hope. Shared stories of future hope. And so what we did, one of the exercises we did back in February of 2011, we were there in Pasadena, was we wrote stories of success. If we were to have success over the next 2 years in ministry, what would that success look like? And so we wrote stories about actual students in our youth group, in our student ministries, from the present to the future, stuff that hadn't happened yet, stuff that we weren't sure was going to actually happen, but trying to plot a course to say, if there was supposed to be a success, that's supposed to happen as a kid transitions from their senior year to freshman year of college, what does that transition look like? What are the elements to that story? What are the elements to their narrative? Because if vision is shared stories of future hope, then let's start talking about that. And so we did that, and then we thought, what would it look like to have small group leaders do that? To have small group leaders write stories about every single kid in their small group. And so we had a day-long retreat where every single small group leader wrote stories about their kids. And then we started thinking, well, what if we could take that? What if we were to take that one step further? And so when we were at our annual camp this year, we really vision casted what a present to future ministry would look like, or a life would look like. And we had every single student write their story of future hope. And so what we're doing this year with our programming, and it doesn't happen every single week. I think like 3 or 4 weeks this year since the school year started, we haven't had kids share stories, but almost every single week we have a student share their story of future hope, their vision story for their lives. And, it's not even a matter of whether or not the specific elements of the story come true. It's that we're just really wanting kids to process what the future looks like. And so if they're a junior and in 2 years they're going to be graduating out of our program and they're going to be going to college and they're going to be confronted with alcohol and drugs and time management and money and, or lack of money and partying and sex, at least we can start having them think about what that transition might look like. And so we have kids share every single week, or at most every week, about what's happening, and it is really, really exciting. I wrote a blog about it called "Stories of Future Hope" on the Sticky Faith blog. So if you guys go to stickyfaith.org, then you can check that out there. So
follow up here. I mean, this is kind of getting away from the what you're talking about in terms of the future stories here, but I'm just thinking, I wonder, I'm curious about your reaction to a statement that Christian Smith gave to us in an interview. We interviewed him over a year ago. For those that don't know Christian Smith, he's a sociologist, Notre Dame University. He's done all kind of research on faith at different levels, and of course he covers teenagers. He is part of what we believe to be the greatest study that's ever been done on the religious life of American teenagers. He and Dr. Melinda Denton, and we've had Melinda on the show as well to talk about this. Christian Smith, his theory is this, that evangelicals have been hurt by an overemphasis on individual salvation. I make this decision, it's me and Jesus, and he says at the expense of community. And the last time we had you on, and right now I'm just listening to you, I mean, part of this thing is about community, and I'm just curious what your reaction to Christian Smith's comment that in the evangelical movement we've focused too much on individual. I mean, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we obviously are enamored with this idea of individual salvation in the church. And don't get me wrong. I mean, and I think you would say this too. I mean, I think we'd all agree that at some point an individual salvation must occur. That there has to be some sort of faith crisis or whatever you want to call it in order for a person to become a follower of Jesus, and so that's important. But we really have lost the elements of what a communal or a community of faith is together, and creating a space where we all discuss together what faith looks like. Oftentimes we say at Frontline, and this is again, this is where sticky faith stuff comes into play, and where we're trying as hard as we can to alleviate some of these issues. People think oftentimes that programs are the things that save people, or programs are the things that change people's lives. And what we say here all the time is programs don't change people; people change people.
Yeah.
It's all about the relationships that we have together. It's the relationships with that small group leader that we have. There was and I don't know the numbers here, but there was a study that was done about youth group graduates who remember how many teachings a youth pastor does when a kid's sitting there. So like an individual, I'm sitting in a chair and I'm listening to one person. I mean, it was like none. I mean, they hardly remember any teachings if they did.
That was pretty disheartening for me to hear that.
It is. I know. Hey, man, I'm doing it right now. I'm speaking tonight, and I'm wondering, is this even effective? But what the kids do remember is they remember the relationships with their small group leaders. They remember when their small group leaders brought them to that bonfire, or brought them miniature golfing or go-kart racing. When they went on that trip together, they remember the time that their small group leader brought them out to lunch at McDonald's. And that's people changing people, not programs changing people. And if we wanted, if we really cared about here at Frontline was just getting people to sit their butts in seats and listen to a sermon, then we wouldn't do anything to follow up with relationships. And so I agree. I agree with what Christian Smith is saying. And the other thing too, to add to what I was saying earlier about Fuller, is that the National Study of Youth and Religion with Christian Smith corroborates the whole idea of intergenerational ministry being effective. I know Melinda Denton would say the same thing.
Yes. Oh, and, listen, her most recent book. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Her most recent book, and I'm going off the cuff here because she co-authored with someone else on her most recent book, but this is what her most recent book is about. Mm-hmm. And their research is showing the importance of intergenerational.
Yeah, and what students when they were asked by Fuller to name the top 5 areas, relationships that they had in the church, parents were first, which is actually very interesting. Which is fascinating. And last were other adults in the church, which is disheartening from an intergenerational perspective. So Fuller's research shows that, and then also the National Study of Youth and Religion shows that other adults in the church were last as far as relationships went, which is it's interesting, to say the least. So, yeah.
Matthew, you talked about, students plotting kind of their course. I had a situation one time where I had a young man who went away to college, and his mother was very upset with me of the choices he was making. And I just kind of said to her, well, where is he going to church? She's like, well, he's not going to church anywhere. And I said, well, when you visited the school, did you show him any churches in the area or around campus? She's like, well, no. And I'm like, well, did you expect your 18-year-old son to move to a new town and living on his own for the first time to decide, hey, I'm going to. And so for me, I wish I would have been more intentional with parents on that. Hey, when you go to visit, I think I took it, our church was on a college campus, a Wesleyan college campus. So a lot of our kids just went across the street. Yeah. But for the ones that went away, I wish I would have been more intentional with the parents to say, hey, let's plot your kids' future. When you take them on this college visit, you need to take them to a church. They need to meet the pastor. And I would try to find, obviously I would try to find them a good Wesleyan church around the college. But if there wasn't, I would say, here's, what are your thoughts on that? Is that something that parents, I was surprised how many parents even overlook that.
Yeah, man, it's huge. What's exciting in regards to you saying that is I think this week, Sticky Faith Fuller just started shipping a 10-week DVD curriculum for students transitioning out of high school, where they talk about those very issues. One of the things that I was having a conversation with Kara Powell about one time was how if a student grows up in the same place and doesn't move, they've probably probably haven't made friends in 15 years. And so they're 18 years old. They have the same friends that they had when they were 3. They don't know how to make friends. They don't, and so they go to a college campus and they go to a party and they feel accepted by a bunch of people and they're all drinking. And so let's just start drinking. And so they're really trying to prepare kids to do that. A church in our Sticky Faith cohort will, in the springtime, actually not attend their Sunday morning services and just go to other churches to try to get kids to see what it's like to walk into a church for the first time. So what is a youth pastor doing to really enforce that? This year we're going to be launching these things called Senior Transition Days, where we're going to be talking about a lot of the things that DVD curriculum from Sticky Faith does. And so that starts at the end of February. We'll be doing that with kids. I think we're meeting 5 or 6 times with all of our seniors, and then we're meeting twice with parents, I think. And so maybe 2 or 3 times, but we're going to be meeting with parents to discuss what does that look like? What does that look like for parents to let go of their kids in some regards? And then one of the most important things that we think is crucial about these future hope stories is what these future hope stories do, regardless of whether the actual elements of the stories come true, is that it eliminates the idea of vicariously living your faith through your mom and dad. It eliminates the idea of vicariously living through your faith through your youth pastor or your other friends, and it requires you to have your own faith narrative. Because you're thinking about your story. You're not thinking about your youth pastor's story or your mommy and daddy's story. You're thinking about your story. And so one of the things that's most exciting about this is getting kids to really process that their faith really is theirs. And we say all the time, we don't want to have our parents' faith, but we haven't really provided a lot of opportunities to make that happen. And so that's really exciting for us to really eliminate that vicariously, living through other people thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, listen, I understand through Heath that Frontline's been investigating and experimenting with new forms of discipleship by actually looking at the process and steps before discipleship. And we're just curious what conversations led to that decision and how is it being implemented? I mean, is this kind of part of it, or give us a sense of, that whole thing?
Yeah, this is something that as I process ministry and as I process the staff here or the staff here processes what ministry looks like, probably this is one of the most exciting things that we've really, really thought about. This is not our original idea. I think John Maxwell would say all the best ideas are stolen, right? And so we've stolen this idea. But we were with Menlo Park Presbyterian Church at our cohort this year. And so they were a part of the cohort. And if you don't know Menlo Park Presbyterian Church, that's John Ortberg's church. So he's the senior pastor there in the Bay Area. A guy named Jim Candy, who gotten to know well over the last little while recently, presented for no joke 10 minutes at the second summit, which might have been the most impactful 10 minutes of the last year with this cohort, about what they're doing in regards to assessing success of discipleship. Typically with discipleship in the church, it's very vague. It's very fuzzy. We talk about terms of, we talk about discipleship in terms of wanting to grow in Christ, but then what tends to happen is we really only tend to start thinking about reading the Bible and praying. You know what I mean? Like, well, are you being discipled? And then when we really get down to it, what are we asking? We're saying, well, have you read the Bible and prayed? And it kind of just goes down to those two things. Right. And not that reading the Bible and praying is a bad thing, or fasting is a bad thing, or spiritual disciplines are bad, because they're all really good. But we're wondering, and Menlo Park is wondering, what would happen if there's like an underlying current before you even start talking about the success of discipleship? Because the reality is that discipleship is, in a lot of regards, very intangible. Like, how do you tell somebody else that they're growing spiritually? Yep. Or how do you tell somebody else they're not growing spiritually, right? That's intangible stuff in oftentimes. And so there are obviously elements that you can look at and say, you're definitely not growing doing that, or you are growing doing that. But anyway, the whole point is they implemented something that they call the 3 buckets, which are the 3 things that they would evaluate or assess success upon. So they did that, and we took this 3 buckets thing and made 4 elements to it. And so we're just rolling this out at Frontline, which we're really excited about. We've kind of been doing this, but it's at least intentional. We've got names for it, But we're doing this model called the SHIP. You have to be very careful how you say that. It ends with P, SHIP. And what we've done is we've taken 4 different elements of a SHIP and attached our discipleship methods to it. And so basically we took the wheel. The wheel is what steers and guides the ship. And so what we said is we want, from a discipleship point of view, we want every student to have a small group leader that knows, loves, and models Jesus for them, and students take next steps of future hope. So that's the first thing. The second thing would be the sail. The sail is what moves the ship forward. The sail is that adults and students are advocating for each other's spiritual growth. And that would be advocating on the same line, because we would say intergenerational ministry is an 8-year-old can teach an 18-year-old who can teach an 80-year-old, and an 80-year-old can teach an 18-year-old who can teach an 8-year-old. So it's advocacy on both ends. And we would say that would be the sail. That's what moves the ship forward, is advocating for each other and their spiritual growth. Third is the mast. That's what holds up the sail. And that would be that parents are connected and equipped. They're connected to other parents, and they're connected to their small group leaders, and they're equipped to raise a child in a biblical way, a solid biblical parenting. And if they don't have parents that are biological, we would say, how can you get surrogate parenting or mentoring or
so
small
good.
group leaders, right? And so, because a lot of times kids' parents and youth groups are not present and they're not followers of Christ. And so we would say, where does surrogate parenting fall in the line? And then the last piece is what we call the oars. And the oars are the physical way we move about the journey. And that would be where we do intergenerational serving on Sunday mornings and then serving throughout the week. And what that's done for us is that's required us to ask, what would we say would be successful if a student, for a student to even have discipleship? So before we even start talking about reading the Bible or praying or fasting, what are the steps that we must put in place for that to happen, to happen at its most effective place? And so we were saying, well, if the wheel, what steers the course of the ship, is that small group, that every student has a small group leader that knows, loves, and models Jesus for them, that's an accountability sort of thing. That's a way for students to actually get that to happen. The other thing that it's done is it's created a really solid vision of what we want for our small group leaders, for our students, and for our parents. These are the things that we're going to focus on. These are the 4 elements that we believe provide the highest possible success rate for faith retention of students. And that's been really exciting. And so what we're doing is we've done this with student ministries. Menlo Park does it from birth to college age. And we're wondering, what does this look like for the entire church? What if we looked at the step before discipleship, the SHIP model, and see, how that would work. So that's kind of the idea.
Well, it's cool because what you've done is you've created some dashboard indicators. And when you said the mast, I was wondering, okay, what's going to be the mast here? I think that's beautiful that you've identified the parents. And just let me say, we under perform at the surrogate parent level, but you guys are dead on with that. This is where the body of Christ comes in, and sometimes our emphasis on individual Christianity hurts us. It's not just faithfulness to the person of Jesus Christ, it's faithfulness to the body of Christ, which is radically different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge. Well said, Tony.
Matthew, last question. One of the things you share with me about Frontline is you guys have been posting in your Facebook groups vision videos so that the church's vision is not just being presented to the church a few times a year, but presented almost weekly throughout the year. Why did you guys decide to do that, and what's been the response? Because this is just a very fascinating thing to me.
Yeah. Well, what we realized, so most churches, a lot of churches would do, annual or biannual vision meetings, where you get all of your volunteers in that specific ministry or all your volunteers together, and you talk about where your vision is headed as the church, where you're going, this year and stuff. And we would do that too. We would do biannual meetings like on a Saturday. It was an all-day kind of thing, and we had all our small group leaders come. And what we were realizing was, like, we were not getting small group leader attendance. It was hard because we would plan these things out, months in advance, asked adult leaders to make it a priority to come, and it was just not happening. And so you'd have people coming late, or you'd have people leave early, or just not come at all. And not really take it seriously. And so what was happening was our 1 or 2 opportunities a year to share vision were not happening because adult leaders weren't showing up. And so what we said was, what would happen if maybe there's something wrong with the system of that? Maybe it really is that we shouldn't ask people to commit, to an entire day of training or, something along those lines. So we said, what would happen if we already have a Facebook group for our adult leadership. What would happen if we posted weekly 5 to 7 minute videos of one topic at one time where we can discuss that throughout the year? And so so what's really been neat about it is it's given adult leaders the opportunity to be trained and resourced in the things that we think are valuable for training and resourcing, right? And what's cool too is it's not like an all-day thing. It's 5 to 7 minutes. I mean, who doesn't have 5 to 7 minutes, of their day, and who's not on Facebook every waking minute of the day anyway?
Yes.
And so, you know what I mean? And so what we've asked adult leaders to do is this is on your own time. We're not asking you to do this at a specific time, but we post videos. We try to post them on Monday afternoon, and we ask adult leaders to respond. We have some discussion questions. We ask adult leaders to respond by Wednesday at 9 p.m. And so they respond with ideas or thoughts specifically in how this relates to their small group. The other thing that's been interesting, and you mentioned this at the beginning, Heath, is this has moved vision from happening once or twice a year to vision being implemented every single week.
Right.
Every single week. And they can do it on their own time. They have time to process it and think about it. And then they have time to do the reflection. Scott Cormode at Fuller in our cohort said, we use the term we learn from experience a lot in the church. And he was like, we don't learn from experience. We learn from reflection on experience.
Right.
And that is really true. That's valuable. And so it's given people the opportunity to reflect on the experience of what they've just heard and go from there. And so when we first started it, I've got a MacBook Pro. We just used the eyesight camera that's built in, and it was kind of like a bad Japanese movie. You know what I mean? Like where sometimes the mouth was not synced up with the words. But we always said, we were joking. It's less about the quality and more about the content.
Yeah.
So the video is not the best thing in the world. More recently, we've been using our iPhones and recording videos on iPhones and then uploading them on Facebook. And so we actually just started doing that. But right now we're reading a book called You Lost Me by David Kinnaman.
Yep.
I'm sure you guys have heard about that.
Yeah.
Some very interesting stuff through Barna. So we're doing a 4-week thing on discussing that book. An intern from Cornerstone University is doing a 4-part video series, and we're just going to have discussions on that book, and it's been awesome. We've talked about adolescence, we've talked about psychology, we've talked about small group leadership, we've talked about discussions, we've talked about listening in small groups as opposed to being the person who talks all the time, but allowing students to be the people who talk as opposed to leaders being the people who talk, what that looks like. And so, we talked a lot about sticky faith. So those are the things that we've done.
Yeah, here again, I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
Yeah, here again, wonderful use of the technology.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at how if you don't have an iPhone, there's a good chance you may have an Android phone which has a camera on it, and so you guys are just, pull the thing out of your pocket and make the video and post it. Yeah. Good
and
stuff.
What we've done too is we were talking about the parenting piece, and what's cool about the parenting piece is we created something called Parenting Conversations, which is another Facebook group that's specifically dedicated to middle school and high school parents. Good. And so we get we post videos on there as well. and have good conversation. That hasn't taken off as much as the adult leadership page because we don't require people to actually post in the conversation, but it's still been good. So yeah.
All right. Neat. Well, listen, we're going to push on in the show here. We know that you got to be off the show at least by 10. So before we move on, let's let our listeners know where they can find you.
Yeah, MatthewDeprez.com is my website, and I blog pretty regularly on there. I haven't blogged in the last little bit, but I blog regularly, and then also twitter.com/MatthewDeprez.
All right. Well, again, Matthew's going to hang with us. If he drops out, you'll just understand that he had to get going to a meeting.
Well,
at this
thanks,
time,
guys.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Matthew.
Absolutely.
Anytime. All right, and let's head to
Download of the Week.
Yes, and our download of the week is Google Currents. Now, if you use Flipboard or Pulse, you know that the Google Currents is like that. It's a news aggregator. I actually have tried Google Currents. I don't know if any of you guys have. Yeah, you have, Matthew. How do you like it?
I was shocked that it doesn't better integrate with Google Reader.
Oh, okay.
Being a Google product,
Sure.
that you have to. It'll let you look at your Google Reader stuff, but you have to look at your entire list and subscribe to every one of the blogs that you're already subscribed to. I don't understand why there isn't an option to pull in your Google Reader into that. So immediately that turned me off because that's something that Flipboard does automatically.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I'm going to tell you, I'm a little disappointed with it in that I've had it crash more than once, and so I go back to Pulse because I don't have issues with Pulse.
Let's try to better define it too, real quick. It's an aggregator of RSS feeds and other feeds that tries to turn website content into more of a magazine-like style to make it easier reading and what have you, and it also keeps things updated and very fresh.
I know a lot of people will send this out on Twitter, but I don't know. It's got to be easy to set it up, but it's like the Tony Casey Daily, where you would go and pick the news stories you want, and it would tweet out to me, and I could look at it, and it's like like a magazine or whatever. I personally am more interested in Google Currency and getting some of that.
Currency, yeah, I got it there. I like Flipboard on my iPhone. I like Pulse for my touchpad. And I've tried Google Currents. But for others, you may, especially if you're trying to keep up on the news, you may like that. All right, let's push forward to They Said It.
Read my lips.
I'm going to say this again.
I've never taken steroids or HGH.
I took the initiative in creating the internet.
The Macintosh, of all the machines I've ever seen, is the only one that meets that standard.
I'm not a crook.
If you know what you're doing here, slide out.
Even if Joe Paterno's will to live was not damaged by the scandal, the immense stress from the chaos in his life would have certainly weakened him in his fight against cancer. Chemotherapy is a harsh treatment method on its own. On an elderly 85-year-old person and someone debilitated emotionally, it would have an even greater impact on his prognosis. Dr. Albert Levy, assistant professor of medicine at Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York. Source, Yahoo News.
Make no mistake, these will be difficult fights, as these organizations are large, well-funded, and very influential in our schools. The fight will be worth it, though, because what is at stake is our future. Al Stefanelli, the Georgia State Director for American Atheists, commenting how the organization is taking on the Fellowship of Christian Athletes in the public schools. Source, The Christian Post.
We're going to paint a brief understanding of what trafficking is and its connection to missing children. We're going to raise red flags on what to follow up with and who to funnel that information to if there really is a need for help. Michael Bartell with Free International, a victims advocate group that is trying to create awareness about human trafficking during the weekend of the Super Bowl. Source, theindychannel.com.
Hello, folks. I'm so glad that you decided to take a time out and donate some of your halftime to this wonderful cause. In 2007, Tony Dungy led the Indianapolis Colts to a Super Bowl championship. But the Colts aren't the only team Coach Dungy has led. For years, he and his wife Lauren have been leading a team of people committed to helping children in need. The Dungies have personally experienced the power of giving a child a loving home. And tonight, Coach Dungy and Lauren want to share a message of empowerment with you. They want you to join with them in their fight for the orphan. Now, not everyone can give a permanent home to an orphan, but I, along with the Dungies, do believe that everyone can help in some way. And by taking this time out with us from the game, you have already done something to help. You have raised awareness. Now, after the video, we will share with you a special website where you can learn of more ways to get involved. So join with me now and the thousands of people around the country that are watching this same message as the Dungies share their heart for the orphan.
When kids don't have a place to call home, when they don't have a mom or a dad, this is a crisis. And this is what we have in America and around the world, an orphan crisis. It's a beautiful thing to see a child placed into their home for the first time. This picture is a vivid reminder of what God has done for us, adopting us into His family.
Adoption has always been part of my life. From an early age, I saw relatives and families in our church adopt or foster children. Because our church talked about it, adoption felt natural to Tony and me.
God was calling us down this path. So, for us, adoption became an act of obedience.
It's staggering. In America alone, there are over 100,000 kids who need a home. Not to mention the millions of orphans around the world.
You have an incredible opportunity to start a movement that says we won't rest until the orphan crisis has ended.
A movement that says we won't rest until every child in America has a place to call home.
We need to act.
This is a video that is going to be running during the Super Bowl. It's actually up now. You can download it. They've made it very accessible, very available. 2.5-minute video, and so you have to admire the Dungies, those that put this together, and the money that's being spent on this. I mean, even let's just say it's in the fourth quarter. Your cheapest commercials are in the fourth quarter, but we're still talking bukus of money,
millions of dollars.
Yeah,
millions of dollars. Matthew, you and your wife Megan just recently went through this adoption process. Tell us about that and what made you want to adopt.
Yeah, I was watching that video. I hadn't seen it yet, and I almost started bawling. It's like,
me too.
Woo, me too, man. Since we've adopted, I am emotional like a pregnant lady all the time. It's ridiculous, and so, man, unbelievable video. Our adoption process started. We started the process in June of 2010 and actually had a placement of a child, Isaiah, by January. And so he just turned 1. My wife and I were in the hospital room during the labor. I left about 2 hours early because I couldn't handle it. No, so I left about 2 hours early before he was born, and my wife was in the delivery room. They handed him to my wife first. And he couldn't be more ours. It's just an amazing thing, and we are passionate supporters of adoption. We adopted through Bethany Christian Services. It's actually based here in Grand Rapids. It's the largest adoption agency in the world, and unbelievable experience. So I'm really excited for that to show during the Super Bowl. That's awesome.
Yeah. Did you notice that Dungy said that for them adoption was a matter of obedience to God?
Yeah,
very, very good. And the correlation between adoption and being adopted ourselves as believers is huge. I want to mention again just a great book, Adopted for Life. I can't remember the name of the author right now. I'll look it up in a minute, but it talks about this in such a beautiful way. I'm going to look that up. You go ahead and talk.
Yeah, Dustin Wilson highly recommended that book to us.
Yeah.
The last They Said It that you read, Heath, we're beginning to get a little bit better traction. It started getting on our radar screen 2-3 years ago that the Super Bowl is a time where human trafficking is large, where they bring young girls in and they're escorts. I mean, it's sexual trafficking.
Yeah.
And this is the first time that I've seen a lot of stuff up front. And there is an Assembly of God pastor, the story that we link you here in the Indy channel, which I think is the ABC affiliate in Indianapolis. There's an Assembly of God pastor who heard about this, and he was appalled. He had no idea that they actually bring young girls into these Super Bowl cities, for this. And so, our whole reason for bringing this up on the show is just awareness. I mean, we all enjoy the Super Bowl. And that night, there'll probably be lots of people at our house. We usually have a Super Bowl party, and for us, it's a lot of enjoyment. And yet, there's behind-the-scenes stuff that's tragic.
Yeah, absolutely. We are encountering a situation in our country church, in our little rural community, where it's not a case of a missing child, but we have some suspicions that there are some young girls being sold out by their parents.
Wow.
For sex. And so we are, this is very recent, in the last week. And so we are just kind of, proceeding with that and praying and trying to gather information, and don't want to make accusations without some, but we have talked to some authorities, and we have the guidance counselors at the school are aware of it, but it just heartbreaking, and you think, man, this doesn't go on in our community, but it does.
Yeah, and that's a tragedy here, because this is not some other country. This is the United States.
Yeah.
This is where this is happening. Some of these young girls are coming from other countries where they're told, you're going to have this wonderful opportunity in America, and basically they've become sex slaves. If you want to get involved with this, the organization FCA International is one way to do that. And I promise you there are other ways. Just go to this link and then follow other links. There are ways to be involved here. So what about the quote that I read there? At first it sounds, wow, this is great. We have a real principled group here.
Yeah.
It's almost inspiring, isn't it?
Yeah. From this hits close to home. We have a young man from our church who is the coordinator for the Tri-County Fellowship of Christian Athletes in South Carolina, here in the upstate. And, our church supports him and his family. So this is very near and dear to our heart, the work of the FCA and what they're doing, and to see the American atheist rising up.
Hey, listen, now, okay, this is what Stefanelli says.
Yeah.
Stefanelli says, wait a minute. And there's another group. If you read this article, there are two groups that they're targeting. I just picked the Fellowship of Christian Athletes because it's more recognizable.
Right.
This is what he says. Let's cut through this. These groups are about proselytizing. It's about making Christian converts. And so we have separation of church and state. Taxpayers shouldn't have to be paying for this group. And so, I mean, what's our response to that?
To my knowledge, the taxpayers aren't paying for this group. Most FCA meetings.
What they're saying is the facilities where they're meeting. They're meeting at public schools. The taxpayer money goes.
But most of their meetings are before school hours or after school hours.
That's true.
And I know with our FCA, one of the things they do, and our church participate in, they provide a meal for the basketball team before home games. There's no Bible study. Hey, you guys need a good meal for your game. Here you go. And obviously, we're all on a different side of this issue than Mr. Stefanelli. No relation to Fonzarelli, but there are. I mean, it is.
Yeah, if I could sit down with Mr. Stefanelli, I mean, one of the observations I would make is that so many kids are looking to sports as an avenue to make it in life.
Yeah. And
one of the issues that we're finding out is that as if they succeed in sports, if there are chinks in their armor, their character issues, they can be exploited. There can be all other kinds of problems. And so, here's a group where it is concerned about the person at the core,
right?
Their character, their integrity, that there are values that need to bring into their life.
Absolutely.
And so, what are you going to replace this with?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the ultimate harm here?
Well, I guess that nothing matters. nothing matters. There's no reason for existence, so none of this matters.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
I just think that there are other evil things to go after. I don't think the Fellowship of Christian is one of them.
This Joe Paternos story hits very close to home to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, my grandmother passed away on Thursday, just a few days before Joe Paterno. She was 85 years old, had a stroke several years ago, and just several strokes since then. It just, did its damage. And so I kind of have, and I guess I've had this thinking for a couple of years while Joe Paterno was coaching, is that I know people in my life who are 85 years old. And I would dare say that, and people age differently, and people are different. But I never thought how an 85-year-old man could be a effective college football coach. Now, granted, the last couple of years, Paterno's had some good years. He's had some bad years. It's sad that this almost the same thing happened to Bear Bryant. Bear Bryant coaches in a bowl game, and it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks later, he's dead. He retires and he dies. And I think if you say that none of this with Joe Paterno is correlated, that he's 85 years old, keeping up with the college football schedule, the scandal, the cancer. It's just a sad story. And the tragedy of this is that a man who had a tremendous impact on countless lives and he's done so much for Penn State University.
Yeah.
And
two things here I think that are undeniable. Number one, anyone that's followed his life, you will not find another football coach in America that did more for a university,
right.
And trying to get kids transitioned out of college into their professions. Right. And he used to just beat this drum. Your future's not in football. Your future is in your degree.
Yeah.
So, and then on the other hand, something that's undeniable. Even he said, "I wish that I had done more concerning the Sandusky thing."
Yeah.
And so we seem to be struggling between two extremes. Some want to Saint Joe, and the other, the devil Joe,
yeah.
And somewhere in between is the truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that I am sad on two fronts. Number one, I'm sad on the front of kids that were abused by Sandusky, and the only way that kind of nonsense stops is adults have to step in.
Yeah,
they do.
Absolutely.
And yet, I'm sad that Joe never got his day in court either. And it's funny, in an interview, he said that like Bear Bryant, if he didn't have football, he probably would just die.
Yeah. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm not sure Bobby Bowden's age, but he had to see this, and it had to be very sobering for him as well.
Alrighty, well, let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. Let's see. Yes, Heath Mulliken, that's your name. Where can our listeners find you?
They can go to heathmulliken.com. I've been doing some stuff with the thing called the Rural Pastor Podcast, trying to get that back up and running. Next week, we've got lined up Reverend Scott Simmons, Director of Youth Ministry for the Wesleyan Church. He's going to kind of follow up on what we talked about this week, and hoping to finalize some details with him, but that's going to be next week's show.
All right, Matthew Deprez, once again, give us just a plug for your website.
MatthewDeprez.com, MatthewDeprez.com.
All right, Mr. TG.
Yeah, the name of the author, Russell D. Moore, wrote Adopted for Life, and then you can find me at MatthewTG.com.
All right, you can find me at Facebook.com/AKC64. And if you want to do further research on anything we discussed today, you can find all the links to the stories we covered at our website, thetechnologyshow.com. If you want to contact us, send your emails to thetechnologyshow@gmail.com, or leave us a voicemail by calling us at 3049-THEOLOGY. That's 304-986-5649. Leave us a message. We may even play your comments on the air. Matthew DePrez, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
All right,
Great show.
Yeah,
Love
blessings
it.
on you, and to all of our listeners, as always, thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Adios.